A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thanks so much for being a part of this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Great to have you with us today on the program. Amy Swear of the Heritage Foundation going to join us, talking about a brand new database that the folks at Heritage and the Daily Signal have put together, all about armed citizens. We see gun control groups have their own databases of things like school shootings, but it is hard to find a database of defensive gun uses, and for reasons that we'll get into with Amy. I do have a little bit of news to get to from the legal front. So we'll get the bad news out of the way first, then we'll get to the good news. Bad news is down in Georgia, and really the bad news isn't even all that bad. Down in Georgia, a U.S. district judge has ruled that the suspension of concealed carry applications temporarily during the coronavirus is not a violation of the Second Amendment rights of a Georgia woman who sued. Sarah Carter lives in Fulton County, Georgia, and in a case brought by Georgia Carey, she alleged that because the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, the Fulton County probate judge, not issuing concealed carry licenses, not accepting concealed carry applications, that her Second Amendment rights were being violated. The Council on Probate Judges in Georgia declared a few weeks ago that the issuance of Georgia weapons licenses are not considered essential functions of the probate court. And so many probate judges around the state are no longer accepting applications for your Georgia weapons license, which you need, by the way, to carry either a handgun openly or concealed. You have to have a Georgia weapons license. If you don't have one, you can't carry a handgun without violating the law. However, U.S. District Judge Steve Jones down in Georgia basically told Sarah Carter with a wink and a nod, you could probably carry and nobody's really going to do anything about it. Pointed out that police in Georgia cannot stop somebody solely because they think that somebody might be carrying without a license. Even if a police officer were to see you carrying, they could not stop you just to see your Georgia weapons license. So the judge said, there's always that option. Basically, you carry. There's also a provision in state law that says if you were carrying because of a justifiable need, that is basically an affirmative defense. If you do have to use your firearm in self-defense, you don't have your Georgia weapons license, you can say, look, clearly I needed that firearm because I had to use it in self-defense, and that would be a defense. Judge Jones also noted that under Georgia law, individuals can carry in their homes, in their place of business. They can transport firearms in their vehicle, and also noted that even if you don't have a Georgia weapons license, the open carry of long guns is permitted under Georgia law. So, in other words, the judge said, look, yes, your Second Amendment rights are implicated here, but they're not being infringed on, because if you really want to carry a firearm for self-defense, there are a number of ways that you can do so. The Georgia Attorney General's office also argued that Sarah Carter should not reasonably fear arrest, even for carrying a firearm without a Georgia weapons license. So again, it's not that the judge gave Sarah Carter and Georgia gun owners the green light to go ahead and carry in violation of state law. In fact, the judge declined to order Governor Brian Kemp to rescind or suspend the Georgia weapons license policy. Said that I can't do that. I can't tell the judge to go that far. But almost a yellow light of caution. You can do this, but here's what you should be concerned of and be aware of. And again, the judge's decision, bottom line, gun control groups are probably going to like it because the Georgia weapons license statute remains in effect. But again, I don't think they're going to like the details, which clearly acknowledges that Georgians do have a right not just to keep, but to bear arms in self-defense. And the judge noted that there are ways to do so, even if concealed carry applications are not being accepted. So that was the bad news. The good news is that the Supreme Court has signaled interest in a Second Amendment case, a case called Rodriguez versus City of San Jose. Basically, the Supreme Court told the City of San Jose, listen, you've got a month to respond to this writ of certiorari, this request for the Supreme Court to hear this case. We know what the plaintiffs say. Now we want to hear from the defendants. And this is a case it's a bizarre issue. Lori Rodriguez, this was 7 years ago. Lori Rodriguez called 911 to report that her husband, Edward, was having an acute mental crisis. Law enforcement officers from the city of San Jose come out. They take Edward Rodriguez into custody on a 5150 hold, a mental health hold, and they remove all of the firearms that are in the Rodriguez home, 12 of them, 11 of them registered to Edward Rodriguez, one of them registered to Lori. They took Lori's gun, even though Lori was not subject to a 5150 hold. Lori was not a prohibited person. Lori was a licensed legal gun owner in San Jose, California, but they still took her firearms, and Lori couldn't get them back. About a month later, after her husband had been discharged from the hospital, the city of San Jose basically took action to permanently keep these firearms. Lori objected. She ended up eventually registering all 12 of these firearms in her name, hoping to get them back. City of San Jose declined to give them back, acknowledged, by the way, that Lori was perfectly free to buy new firearms. But the city said, well, we don't have to give them back because we feel like your husband is a danger to himself or others, and so therefore he can't have his guns. Originally, a case was filed in state court. The judge ruled against Lori Rodriguez. She then brought, with the help of the Second Amendment Foundation and the California Gun Rights Foundation, a federal lawsuit. The federal courts in California, including the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, basically argued that they couldn't do anything about this case because it was just a relitigating an issue that the state court had decided. So among the questions that the Supreme Court is now being asked are whether or not that's the case and whether or not you can have your firearms taken from you, even if you're not a prohibited person, without a search warrant. You can't get them back, but you're free to buy new ones. How on earth can that not be a violation of your right to keep and bear arms? No guarantee that the Supreme Court is going to hear this case, but given the fact that they are asking the city of San Jose to respond, it is a sign that the court is interested, and that is good news for gun owners. All right, now let's get to our conversation with a friend, Amy Swear from the Heritage Foundation Daily Signal, all about this new database. Here's a sneak peek at what this database looks like, where you can search for defensive gun uses throughout the country. Over the past couple of years, they're looking to add more on a regular basis so you can have a better understanding of just how frequently these defensive gun uses take place and are covered in the media. That's an important distinction here, because a lot of these armed citizen stories will never be covered by the media. Most of them certainly not by the national media. But looking at local news reports from around the country, you can at least get a better sense of how often Americans are using firearms in self-defense. Take a look and a listen to our conversation with Amy Swear all about this cool new database. Amy, thanks so much for coming on the program today. It's great talking with you. Great to see you in person, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, and definitely a new experience, not just over the phone, but here live with you.
Absolutely. And you know, it's funny. I mean, I've been so busy over the past, ever since the lockdown began. I go online and I see all these people, talking about what they're doing with their days. I'm like, what is up with that? I'm working just as hard as I ever have. I know that you all are as well at the Heritage Foundation. In fact, you've been working on this really cool project, and I think gun owners around the country are going to be really, really excited about this. Tell us about this new database of armed citizen stories that you all have come up with.
Sure. So for those of you who have sort of been following what I've been doing at the Daily Signal for the last year or so, starting in January 2019, we started publishing a monthly series, just, highlighting 10 or 12 times that month that lawful gun owners use their guns to defend themselves or others. The idea of the good guy with a gun, defensive gun uses. And what we started noticing as we're going through this was every single time we'd find dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of other similar stories from that month that we just didn't have space to highlight. So we just started keeping track of them, keeping sort of our own internal database, if you will. And looking at this, we decided we've got to publish this. we've got to make these stories available to people in a way where they can come, and look at a map and see this is happening in my backyard, in my city, in my state. So that's what we did. We put together a database, an interactive map where gun owners can go and look and see all of the times, the hundreds and hundreds of times this is happening, that we can verify. So again, this is not, and we don't pretend that it is some sort of comprehensive database. This is just probably a fraction of the times. That number is estimated to be 500,000 to 3 million times a year. So this is just a fraction of those times, but verifiable times when law-abiding citizens use their guns defensively.
And again, you're right. It's hard to actually, if not impossible, to keep track of every one of these because most defensive gun uses are never even reported by the media, right? In some cases, they may not even be reported to police. The presence of that firearm is enough to dissuade a crime from occurring. But even when a story does get reported to police, some local reporter picks it up. Rarely do those stories ever make the national media. And so you might read about it in your local paper, but unless you're actively looking for these types of stories, you're simply not going to find them. I mean, we do an Armed Citizen story every day here on Variant Arms Cam & Company. We've done this, going back to 2004 when I started Cam & Company with NRA News. And you're right. I mean, it's a matter of, okay, well, what story am I going to cover today? Am I going to highlight? Sometimes, you'll find a write-up in a paper and it's there's not much information. It's 3 or 4 sentences. That's all you've got to go on. I'm in media too. I want to find that sexy story, the one that has the most detail, the one that, I can pay the most attention to. And so I end up leaving stories on the table, and feel bad that I don't get a chance to report each and every Armed Citizen story that I run across. So to have this database in hand, where you can go and you can look up, all of these stories, not just where you live, but around the country. I think it's absolutely incredible. So how are you finding these stories? Are you looking primarily through media? Is that where you're getting these Armed Citizen stories?
So this is all public record.
Okay.
This is the way we decided to do it. So what we wanted to refrain from doing was what you see a lot of times with similar databases for gun control groups, where they'll be like, here's all the school shootings. And then half of them don't even fit anything remotely resembling a legit definition of what people think of with the school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to, make sure it was verifiable, that it wasn't just someone saying, hey, this happened to me. So there was some sort of public record. We also wanted to make sure it was law-abiding citizens, because sometimes what will happen is, it'll be someone who legitimately defended themselves, but, people broke into their home because they were running a meth lab, or they got robbed because they were a drug dealer, or they were, a felon in possession of a gun, something like that. So we wanted it to be law-abiding citizens who also then use their guns responsibly, because sometimes you do have people where it's like they're not charged, but, they did something that as responsible gun owners, we just didn't feel was legitimate, such as like shooting at someone as they're running away, or, in some cases, the person is detained, but then they'll pistol whip them or something. So we wanted to make sure these were legitimate and reasonable and responsible, and then also publicly verifiable. So that was sort of our definition of how we went about this.
Do you wait? Because one of the things that I've noticed in covering these stories is that oftentimes the news report will come before the investigation concludes. So everything looks like it's a case of self-defense, but you'll see that line at the bottom of the story. Police say they continue to investigate, but no charges have been filed. Right. So how do you determine? Do you go back and do you wait and see what happens to these stories, or do you go back and correct the database if needed? If it turns out that, ultimately charges are filed in one of these cases?
So the answer is kind of all of the above. So sometimes it's very obvious just from the way that law enforcement is talking to the media about it, where, law enforcement will say, look, all of the facts seem to confirm the gun owner story. But given state law, so in some states like Texas, if there's any sort of homicide, any sort of dead body, it has to be referred to a grand jury. As you indicated there, most times, unless the grand jury it indicts, there's no story about it. So we'll wait probably a month or so. And if there's no sort of indication that this person is going to be charged, our presumption is, unless unless there is some sort of other indication from the article, our presumption is that the person acted lawfully, was not indicted, was not charged. But there is sort of that line we have to ride where, we've been trying to update these stories as possible.
And it's interesting because I'm looking at the database as we're talking here, and this is really cool. You can search for incidents in 2019, 2020, within the past 90 days. And just looking at the past 90 days, what's fascinating to me, what immediately jumps out is that even in places that we think of as anti-gun locales, you still have a number of people who are acting in self-defense. You've got a number, this is again, just in the past 90 days, you've got a number of incidents in California, number of incidents in Illinois, a couple of incidents up in Michigan, Pennsylvania, where the governor there has tried to shut down gun stores, ultimately reopened them. So this tells me that, our right of self-defense is not just a right of red states, right? That there are Americans, even in these states that have a lot of gun control laws on the books, that are still protecting themselves with firearms.
Absolutely. So you do see a lot in places like New York and California. And I think part of that is that's just how population centers work. So even though it's harder to get firearms there, there are a lot of places there that tend to be the most crime-ridden areas as well because of how population centers work. And so, it's something that the more you think about it, the less, the more it makes sense. But it is a sort of initial reaction of, wow, there are a lot of gun owners in California still defending themselves. And it makes you think, what would that number be? What would this map look like if California had sort of the same respect for the Second Amendment that other states had as well?
Absolutely. One of the other great things about this database that you have, so let's say you find a story or you find an incident on the map and you want to learn more, you click on the button and it tells you what type of encounter this was, whether this was a home invasion, whether this was, a robbery on the street. But you also provide a link to the original media report so people can see for themselves some of the details about this. I think this is really, really a great job that you all have done.
Yeah, no, we're really excited about it. Our goal is to keep updating it, go back through past years. You talked about the last 90 days. That last 90 days is actually not including much of April that we haven't been able to update yet because we had to sort of pick a cutoff for when we were going to get it uploaded onto there. Our goal is also we know that we're missing stories. We know that there are more stories out there that people are going to notice, like, hey, this happened in my neighborhood and it's not on there. So our goal is to get some sort of mechanism where people can report the stories to us, send us a link. If you have a police report that indicates, that this happened, send it to us. Any sort of verifiable information. We want this to be as thorough and as fleshed out as possible.
Yeah, I'm looking at the map here, and I'm like, oh well, I know there was a case in Sacramento this past weekend that's not up on the map yet. There was one in Buxton, Maine that's not up yet. I'll send you those links. I'll make sure that you know about them. And so are you hoping that this will change the debate? What are you hoping that people get out of this database?
Well, I think two things. I think one, it's important to have a visual narrative that sort of counters what you see from gun control groups, where it's like, here's our map of school shootings and mass shootings. And I think it's important to have that visual. So you have had some groups that have, purported to put out a database, and they've put out maps for everything else, but they won't put out the visual map for defensive gun uses. And I think that it's because they know how powerful it is. But I also think it's really the importance of gun owners being able to look at this and go, we're not crazy. These are things that are happening, that we can look at these stories and you get to know the gun owners themselves. I mean, that's the amazing thing about looking at these stories is you don't see people who fit that sort of caricature of gun owners. These are a lot of single mothers protecting their kids at home. It's a lot of disabled individuals who are outnumbered and in wheelchairs and able to defend themselves. Elderly couples, who are attacked. People that, you just get this sort of counter to this narrative of, defensive gun uses happen when some typical middle-aged white guy went looking for trouble and found, right. When Cam Edwards went vigilante looking for trouble and found it. And it's really not the case. And so I think it really gives the other side of the story about who gun owners are and why they have these guns and the situations in which they're defending themselves.
Talking again with our friend Amy Swear from Heritage Foundation Daily Signal. And you're right. I mean, you talk about those stereotypes getting blown away. There was a story, and you may have been thinking about this when you talked about elderly couples. There was a story out of Texas, I think it was about a week and a half ago, where a couple, she's in her 60s, he's in his early 70s, 19-year-old, apparently high on something, breaks into the home, ends up putting the 73-year-old man in a headlock and chokes him out, basically renders him unconscious, assaults him, and the 65-year-old woman inside that home retrieved a firearm and ultimately shot and unfortunately killed the 19-year-old. He paid the ultimate sacrifice for breaking into that home and assaulting these strangers. But, again, here's a 65-year-old woman protecting her significant other. That is, again, that's not the stereotype of who gun owners are. And frankly, again, I think back to that. If that woman were not able to protect herself with a firearm, what would the ultimate outcome of that story have been? Would we have been talking about, instead of a self-defense shooting, a double homicide in Texas? Because I doubt that physically the 65-year-old woman would have been able to take on a 19-year-old who was high on something.
Yeah, and that's, that's the amazing thing I think about some of these stories is not necessarily even what happened, but what was prevented from happening. I can think of even, just again from the last year, some of the stories that are on here of concealed carry permit holders stopping what would ultimately, we suspect, would have been a mass shooting. Things that would have been in the news for weeks. Mm-hmm. And instead what you have is maybe a 30-second snippet, local news, probably, maybe a national news outlet, if you're lucky, a 30-second snippet for what otherwise would have been weeks and weeks and weeks of this is why we need gun control. But instead, because that individual was there to defend himself and others, it's almost a non-story.
Yeah, it's a weird form of media bias. And on the one hand, again, I kind of understand why the media would say, well, listen, there weren't anybody hurt, or there was maybe one person injured, so this is not the same as a mass shooting where you had, let's say a dozen or more people who were killed. It just doesn't rise to that level. At the same time, though, it absolutely does, because you're talking about the prevention of a mass casualty event. And to me, that's absolutely as newsworthy when one of these types of attacks gets stopped or thwarted. That's absolutely as worthy of media attention as when one of these killers is able to successfully carry out their attack.
Yeah. And it's also been interesting to see sort of how these stories are reported and sometimes what's not reported. So there will be some times where we don't have relevant information for a long time, and it'll turn out someone used an AR-15 and shot, 24 times, and it's not, or defended themselves and got into a shootout and needed 15, 16, 17 rounds. And you only learn that because it got caught on someone's door cam. And, you're sitting there counting the shots going, well, that's very relevant that, this was far more than the 10 rounds. Why would anybody need, the 11th, 12th, 13th round? And it's those things where it's interesting as you go through and you watch the videos, those things that aren't necessarily reported, but that just happen to be picked up on someone's door cam. And so it's things like that, we want those stories out there so that other people can go and look through these and pick up on those things that we're not necessarily able to document, but because the database is there, the links are there in one cohesive place, that they can go and do that as well.
Well, again, I think it's a fantastic database where we've got the link up below, and we'll post that as well at bearingarms.com. But again, thank you for doing this. I think this is going to be a huge benefit to not only to gun owners, but for folks who are really interested in an honest discussion about our right to keep and bear arms and about our right to self-defense. Amy Swear of the Heritage Foundation and Daily Signal, good to see you, and hope we get a chance to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Always great to be on.
Thanks, Amy. All right, now let's get to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. In fact, let's start there. From Alabama, where AL.com reports a suspect with a 21-year-old suspect, by the way, with a lengthy criminal history, sought after leading lawmen on a chase. His companion taken into custody, 21-year-old Gerald Lamar Russell. On the loose and on the run after leading lawmen on a chase in Jefferson County on Friday night. It began shortly before 8:30 p.m. Brookside, Alabama police attempted a traffic stop. The driver refused to stop. That's when the chase began. Brookside police, assisted by Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies and Birmingham police, pursuit traveled onto Interstate 65 and then into Birmingham. That is when Russell allegedly jumped from the vehicle, fled on foot towards a residential area. The passenger then crawled into the driver's seat, led police on a second chase. They were able to take her into custody, but Jones nowhere to be found. Russell nowhere to be found. Police say that Russell has active felony warrants out for 2 counts of failure to appear on attempted murder charges. And first-degree armed robbery for crimes that took place in 2019 and earlier this year. The chief of police there in Birmingham, Alabama, Brookside, Alabama, Mike Jones, wondering why this guy was even out. He said Russell's only 21 years old. He already has a lengthy criminal history with numerous violent felony offenses. He's a known drug dealer who was previously released on bond. He failed to appear in court and continues his violence on the streets. Said he has previous arrests for multiple weapons charges, reckless endangerment, attempt to elude police, receiving stolen property, possession of a controlled substance. Jones said, why is this violent habitual offender with a history of running from justice and failure to appear on numerous violent felony charges allowed to make bond? He was allowed to put innocent lives in danger again, and that is unacceptable. So despite, again, a history of not showing up for his court dates, every time this guy gets arrested on violent charges, he's apparently let out. He's not held on bond as a flight risk or a risk not to appear in court or even a danger to the community, though he's now facing attempted murder charges. And he is today's recidivist report. Our armed citizen story of the day from Toledo, Ohio. This headline's a weird headline, and I gotta say, this story is kind of a weird story, too. Man shot during home intrusion argument in East Toledo. This is from 13 ABC in Toledo, Ohio. It really wasn't a home intrusion argument as much as it was a home invasion. Police responded to a person who was shot around 1 a.m. Tuesday morning in the 400 block of 4th Street. When they arrived, they learned that 28-year-old Darnell Jones entered the home of 29-year-old James Hardwick without his knowledge or invitation. In other words, he broke in. He broke into the home. Jones has a listed address next door to Hardwick. After a verbal exchange, Jonathan Hardwick, 26 years old, fired 1 round from his Glock 40 caliber pistol, striking Jones in the chest. Jones transported to Mercy St. Vincent Medical Center. Wounds are not believed to be life-threatening. The investigation is ongoing, but this would appear to be a case of self-defense against a home invader or a home intruder, not somebody who is, just in somebody's home without knowledge or invitation. That's breaking in. That's you're somewhere you weren't supposed to be and you refused to leave. And yeah, we'll try to keep you updated on any more details out of Toledo, Ohio. But there is today's armed citizen story. And finally, our good deed of the day. You ready for this one? From Ottumwa, Iowa. That is Pauline Stice. Tuesday was her birthday. She turned 90. And the Ottumwa Courier says that because of the coronavirus concerns, because of her advanced age, she's stuck at home. But neighbors made sure that she was not alone on her birthday. Neighbors surprised her by holding up balloons. They sang happy birthday from the yard. Pauline Stice says, I never had this much excitement before. She said, I wasn't expecting this. It was a total surprise. The Ottumwa Fire Department even drove by and waved to Pauline Stice. Her neighbor, Carrie Wolf, wanted to do something to celebrate this milestone. So she coordinated the surprise with neighbors, became the birthday fairy, handing out wrapped chocolates and sugar cookies to neighbors. She said, everybody kind of decided on it. We just decided we had to do something. Everybody pitched in. They brought balloons and everything. She says, I've known Pauline for years. She's a really fun person. Even gave me Barbie dolls growing up. She always had pop, cookies, and treats. She has always been well loved. And so this, she says, was for her. Before the surprise celebration, the Ottumwa Courier says that Stice woke up around dawn to work on a quilt that she is making at age 90. She said she was excited for the birthday plans that she had with her immediate family, which included lunch, chocolate cake, vanilla ice cream, She says, I like doing things for others, but it kills me when they do nice things for me. She says, today was amazing, though. I liked every minute. I never dreamed of anything like this. Pauline Stice's daughter, Sue Greer, says it was nice for her and nice that so many recognized how she's helped. She is blessed and she helps them. She is just thankful for everything. So happy 90th birthday, Pauline Stice there in Ottumwa, Iowa. And to those neighbors who helped make sure that Pauline's Day was a special day, we thank you for your very, very good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms. Cam and Company want to thank you for being a part of the program. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Don't forget, you can check out bearingarms.com throughout the day, where we are regularly updating the website, again, with the most important Second Amendment stories from around the country, and even stories dealing with the right, well, not the right, because it's not a right in most countries, but dealing with gun ownership in other countries. We got a story out from Australia right now talking about the fear that gun owners and gun store owners have that closed gun shops are going to be shuttered forever, not going to be able to afford to reopen. That's not just a U.S. thing. It's happening around the globe as well. And don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube or the Bearing Arms Cam and Company podcast on Apple Podcasts. That way you never miss a program. Have a great rest of your day. Be safe, be well, be safe, be well, be free. And we'll see you soon with more Cam and Company.